Welcome, everybody, to Mom Street USA. My name is Jackie, aka Wishes Mama. And for this episode of Mom Street USA, we are going to be revisiting a topic that we actually discussed about 5 or so months ago here at Mom Street. But we've got some new things to talk about and some new updates, and that is early entry and rope drop at the Disney parks. So that is our topic for today. Like I said, Kate and I discussed this not too long ago, but there's some new strategies and some new kind of setup for some of these theme parks. So wanted to come to you guys with some updated information regarding all of that. So before we hop in, just a quick rundown of what early entry and rope drop are in case you are unfamiliar or haven't heard or are new to this whole Disney parks thing. Um, Early entry is what Disney calls the time that resort guests get before the official park opens. So, if you are staying at a Disney resort, that would be any of the resorts on property at Disney World and the three I think it is on property at Disneyland, you will get early entry, which is a 30-minute period before official park open that you will have access to the rides. So you'll hear me use that term throughout the evening tonight as we talk about the different strategies for early entry. And you'll hear me talk about kind of on property versus off property because there are some differences in strategies when it comes to utilizing rope drop and early entry for that. So again, early entry is that extra time that you get if you are a resort guest. Rope drop is basically just park open. It's when for years and years and years, Disney had official rope drops, quote unquote, where they would have cast members with ropes across a lot of the different pathways and things that you can find to gain access to those rides throughout the park. And rope drop is literally what it sounds like. It is the act of them dropping the rope to allow people to go through. So, you'll hear kind of both of those terms used in this episode. So, I wanted to make sure you kind of had an idea about what we were talking about. So that way you can kind of stay on the same page as we go through each of these. Today's episode is going to focus on Disneyland and Disney World. We're not going to talk about overseas parks for this one, just wanted to focus on the US based parks. We did cover this in episode 69, so not too long ago. And the majority of what I'm going to talk about for Disneyland is still the same as what we talked about in that episode. But a couple of the parks for Disney World have had some pretty significant changes to either their early entry process or their rope drop process. So, wanted to bring you guys that updated information so that you could best prepare for any upcoming trips that you may have. All of that being said, let's kind of hop into some general tips. One more thing I do want to mention is that we are going to talk a little bit about lightning lanes in this episode, but we are not going in depth. So, this is not your guide for what to do with lightning lanes, how to do them, those types of things. I am planning to do another refresher on lightning lanes and a Q&A here coming up in about a month or so. So, we'll tackle all of the logistics of that in a few episodes down the line. But you will hear me mention some strategies for lightning lanes, just because a lot of this information for early entry and rope drop really can be swayed one way or the other by whether or not you are utilizing those lightning lanes. So I can't completely leave it out, but I'm not going to go super in depth with the lightning lanes for this particular episode. Now, a couple of general tips for if you are planning to utilize early entry and planning to be at the parks for rope drop. Let's talk about those. First of all, you got to get some sleep. Those are going to be early mornings if you're trying to do rope drop. You may have to plan accordingly to not be out for an evening show the night before you're planning on doing a big rope drop. It depends on your group, depends on how much sleep you need, depends on if you are early risers or not, but Definitely planning out at least a little extra sleep before you need to get up early for that rope drop plan. The other thing that I will say is prepping the night before can be massively helpful. So, depending on, again, your party, your travel group, that could be laying out clothes for you, for your other adults, for your kids in your group. That could be being sure that your park bag is packed and ready to grab so you're not running around the room scrambling to find things in the morning. Setting out things for breakfast if you're able to. So if you're doing granola bars, Pop Tarts, easy muffins, something quick to grab, kind of setting that out and prepping that the night before can be helpful. Um, Also prepping your coffee. I know that's something that we a lot of us do probably well at home, but maybe not so well at Disney or when we're on vacation. But prep your coffee so that way you can just hit start in the morning and you won't be stuck waiting for your coffee to brew before you want to get out the door. So those are kind of my night before suggestions if you're planning to do an early morning for a rope drop. Another suggestion that I have is give yourself more travel time than you think that you will need. Getting to the parks from your resort, whether you are on property, off property, no matter where you're staying, can take longer than you think. Because not only do you have to factor in drive time, which is fairly easy to do with all of our technology and maps and things like that, but you're going to have to factor in parking time if you're parking and if you're driving and parking, walking time from whatever transport you're taking, whether that's a bus, a Skyliner, a car, that walking time, and then also security time, because every theme park has those security gates that you will have to go through before you can get into the park. So, factoring in extra time to be able to handle all of that, especially when it's a really busy season like the holidays, you really wanna make sure you give yourself enough time. Another suggestion that I have is when you are looking for your rope drop ideas. And we're gonna talk about strategy and what rides I suggest and my thoughts and things like that here shortly for each park, but you really need to have like an ABC plan, right? You need to have, okay, top choice, plan A, we wanna go here and then here and then here. Okay, maybe your top ride is the line is too long by the time you make it through security and through the gates and you have to pivot. You wanna have some backup plans to pivot because standing around during early entry and having to make a decision in the moment is not only stressful, but it wastes time. Your time in the morning when you are getting to the parks can be so beneficial to getting through a ton of rides. The first, I'd say, 2 hours that a park is open is really your best time to get through a ton of attractions and knock a bunch of things off your list. So, making sure you have those plan A, plan B, plan C can really help you not waste time and just go, okay, that didn't work, pivot to plan B, and so on and so forth. And that will make it so much easier. The other thing is with those plans, when you physically get in the park and you're lining up, queuing up, ready to go, you need to put yourself in a position for success. So, know where you're going, know what ride you're trying to get to, know which area you need to kind of set yourself up for success. Know where the stroller parking is if you've got kiddos and strollers that are going with you and you know that, okay, we want to hit Space Mountain first. Know where you're going to dump your stroller so that way you're not wasting a ton of time getting in and out of the stroller before you get into the queue for that particular attraction, just as an example. This can also help you avoid backtracking. So if you know that during I'll just keep using this Magic Kingdom example, which will again, we'll talk about the parks here shortly. But that way, if you know you want to hit, let's say, Space Mountain, Buzz Lightyear, and Winnie the Pooh during your early entry, you know what makes sense to go where. So that way you're not doing a ton of cross backtracking, especially if you've got things in different spaces in the parks, different lands, different areas, you wanna kinda cluster them together to help you avoid that. Knocking out an entire land or an entire half of the park or section of the park on the map is really beneficial during your early entry time because then you don't have all that extra walking. later in the day to try to backtrack and go back to where you were originally, like first thing in the morning. So, those are just kind of my overall general tips when it comes to rope drop and when it comes to early entry. But now let's jump into the parks. And the previous episodes that Kate and I did this, we did some really in-depth stuff on, especially on Disneyland. Not a lot has changed at Disneyland. So I'm going to go over it again, but it's not going to be maybe as in-depthly as we did before, just because a lot of this is pretty standard for those parks out on the West Coast. So let's talk about Disneyland. A couple things about each park. We'll go over kind of a general idea of when I suggest you arrive. This can all vary greatly based on how busy the parks are, what time of year it is. Those types of things can all have an effect, obviously, on the crowds and what time you should arrive. But generally speaking, I'm going to give you guys some tips for each on the crowds and what time you should arrive. But generally speaking, I'm going to give you guys some tips for each park and then talk about where I would go if I were utilizing early entry, and then where I would go if I'm utilizing rope drop as a non-resort guest. So for Disneyland, I suggest that you get there at least 45 minutes before whatever time it is that you have access to the park. So you want to give yourself plenty of time to get in, get ready to go. So that way you can, again, position yourself accordingly. So whichever side of the park you are planning to go to, you are ready to go at the correct time so that you do not miss that early entry access time for that, or rope drop if you're doing rope drop for park or non-resort guests. Sorry. If you are utilizing lightning lanes, the lightning lanes out in Disneyland are different than Disney World. So, talking Disneyland, you will purchase your lightning lanes and book your first one as soon as you have tapped into the park. Keep in mind, if you have a large group, you need to make sure that everybody has tapped into the park and that everybody's ticket has been scanned on your app so you can book for more than one or for your whole group at one time. As far as order that you should book your lightning lanes, again, going to briefly go over this. We have touched on this before, but if you're booking lightning lanes for Disneyland, my suggestion to you is book Indiana Jones first, then Matterhorn, Smuggler's Run, and Big Thunder Mountain, and then kind of go about your day from there, depending on what rides you're able to do standby or during this rope drop time period. So those are my suggestions for the order for lightning lanes. Again, you book them one at a time out in Disneyland still. For the single pass rides out there, Rise of the Resistance is the one that you have your single pass for. So if you choose to purchase that, if your budget allows, that is your option. And you would do that again as soon as you tap in. So let's talk about rope drop and early entry. Your best use of time early in the park at Disneyland is to go to your Fantasyland area. Mostly because if you are using lightning lanes at Disneyland, the majority of the rides in Fantasyland do not have lightning lane access. Their queues are not set up to be that way. They don't have enough space for any additional lines, so they are not included in your lightning lane multi-pass out in Disneyland. So I always suggest that you head there first to try to get a lot of those out of the way because there's just no option for helping you make those lines shorter. And again, that goes for lightning lane, no lightning lane, or whether or not you are utilizing early entry. Fantasyland in the morning is going to be the best place for you. I'm going to give you kind of two different categories of the rides that I would prioritize. Land in the morning is going to be the best place for you. I'm going to give you kind of two different categories of the rides that I would prioritize depending on your situation. And then you can kind of mix and match and pick and choose what makes sense for your group that is visiting Disneyland. So if you've got non-thrill seekers or a bunch of small children with you, I would suggest in the morning, first thing, again, you utilizing early entry or getting there right at rope drop. You're going to want to visit Alice in Wonderland, Dumbo, Snow White, the Carousel, Mr. Toad, Casey Jr., and then Small World. So you're knocking out that Fantasyland section that we just talked about. Getting a lot of those done early on. That way you get through as many as possible before those lines get too long later in the afternoon. Now, if you are a group that has older kids, teens, or thrill seekers that are tall enough to ride things, your early entry and or rope drop time is going to look a little bit different out at Disneyland. My suggestion for the order that you do the rides out there would be to go to Space Mountain first. So that's going to be your first one that you hit if you are a thrill seeker. Then Matterhorn, Indiana Jones, Big Thunder Mountain, Pirates, Haunted Mansion, and Star Tours. Now that list, just kind of have to take a look at the list, figure out what makes sense for you. Because if you're someone utilizing lightning lanes, you heard me say earlier, Indiana Jones, Matterhorn, those are two of the ones that I listed earlier for lightning lanes. Those are also two of the ones that I listed on that priority list. So just pick and choose what makes sense and skip over the ones that you're going to have lightning lanes for, especially early in the morning. So again, you could also still do them during your early entry and rope drop time, and then do them a second time with a lightning lane if you chose to later on in the day as well. So a couple different options for that if you are looking to hit some of those more e-ticket or thrill-seeking attractions at Disneyland. So that kind of in a nutshell is my suggestion for Disneyland. Again, Fantasyland is really important. And then for your thrill seekers, Space Mountain, Matterhorn, Indiana Jones, Big Thunder Mountain. So kind of just hitting the highlights of those big coaster style rides out there at Disneyland. Now, California Adventure has its own set of information that you need to know if you are visiting there. Again, you're going to want to arrive to California Adventure about 45 minutes before you can gain access to the park. That's to give time for you to go through security, to get queued up at the gate, figure out what you need to do. Um, Again, once if you are utilizing lightning lanes, once you tap in and your whole party has tapped into the park, then you are able to start to book those. Um, there is a virtual queue at California Adventure. That is one of the only parks currently in the US that is utilizing virtual queue, and we'll talk about that more in Disney World here a little bit later. But there is the virtual queue for World of Color, which is the nighttime show at DCA, and the World of Color virtual queue drops at noon, and it gives you a specific viewing area that you have kind of like reserved then. So definitely suggest doing that. It is free. Anybody can do it. You just have to hop on your app at noon on your Disneyland app to join that for your group. Now, if you are utilizing lightning lanes at California Adventure, a couple just notes on the lightning lanes that I would suggest you look into first. As far as booking, I would grab a time for Guardians Mission Breakout first if you're utilizing lightning lanes at DCA. After that, I would look at Web Slingers, Toy Story Midway Mania, and Soarin'. So that's kind of your short list. Again, there are more attractions other than that, but that's kind of your short list for priority for lightning lanes at DCA. As far as single pass goes, Radiator Springs Racers does have a single pass option there. So if that is something that you are budgeting for or you want to purchase, you will again do that as soon as as soon as your whole party has tapped into the park. Just a word of caution for rope drop with DCA. You will hear a lot of people talk about rope dropping Radiator Springs Racers. That is your big ticket attraction back in Cars Land. Uh, I don't necessarily agree with that suggestion because a couple things. Everyone goes there, so the line gets crazy long. Um, it is also one that does not always actually frequently does not open on time. It's very slow to wake up in the morning. So keep those things in mind because you may get there. I talked about having plan A, plan B, plan C. You may get there and you may have to immediately pivot if it's not open. So plan accordingly. Make sure you know what you're thinking and what you're doing. The nice thing is at Disneyland in general with those two parks, it's easy to hop between the two. So that may help you out with something like Radiator Springs Racers because it does have a single rider line. So if you are a person who is able to, or a group that doesn't mind, if you've got a bunch of teenagers and adults, you don't mind riding separately, that's a great option. Or riding it at the very end of the night. If it's a night where you've already seen the nighttime shows, or you don't plan to see the nighttime shows for that evening, you can jump in line kind of close to park close to help alleviate some of the wait that you would have for that one. Now, let's talk about what rides to prioritize. Again, this is regardless of if you're using lightning lanes or not. So if you have some of these booked for lightning lanes, then you don't need to necessarily rope drop them unless you want to do a second ride for these. But this order would be what I would suggest when it comes to rope drop or early entry, depending on when you're entering the park. Um, First ride you're going to want to do is Web Slingers, then head to Soarin', and then you're going to head over to Cars Land to hit Mater's Junkyard Jamboree and Luigi's Rollickin' Roadsters. Again, we are saving the Radiator Springs Racers for either later in the day or a single rider later on. And then after Luigi's, you're going to do the Pixar Pal Around, Toy Story Midway Mania, and a credit coaster, and then go from there. Just a note that you did not hear me mention Guardians Mission Breakout on that list. And that would be because I highly suggest if you have not purchased a lightning lanes and you're not planning to use a lightning lane for that, I would wait on that until the end of the night. So you may have to kind of decide if you are going to be doing just a single pass for Radiator Springs Racer, then Guardians would be your last ride. If you're not, then you just may have to kind of pick and choose and decide, one, what your budget will allow you to do, and then two, which of those is most important if you only have one evening in DCA. Just a lot of things to consider when it comes to logistics for those rides. So all of that being said, that's kind of in a nutshell suggestions for what order to book your lightning lanes and what order to go to the attractions early on in Disneyland parks. Let's hop over now to Disney World, which has a lot more logistics to talk about. So we'll hop into that here now. All right, so we are going to start with the park that I feel like has had the biggest change for their early entry whole situation, and that is Magic Kingdom. So let's talk about Magic Kingdom at Disney World. They recently adjusted the way that they are doing their early entry. Now, we don't know if this is permanent. We don't know if this is just for the season because we're in the midst of kind of spring break into summer season. We're not really sure. So at the time that I am recording this, this is what I know. Starting basically when Main Street opens, which is typically 75 minutes before posted park open time, you still scan in as a resort guest in the same space that you were kind of on the Tomorrowland side of the hub. But after that, you can go get in line for whatever attraction it is that you are planning to ride first. So previously, they had two holding areas. You would scan in on that side of the hub, and then they would hold you either at the Tomorrowland Bridge or the walkway between Tomorrowland Speedway and Cosmic Rays. Those were the two holding places that they used to use. That is no longer how they are doing rope drop at Magic Kingdom. You now have the ability to go to the attraction that you are planning to rope drop. So this kind of drastically changes the way that rope drop looks for early entry. We're talking about early entry because you don't necessarily if you're not there at that point in time, it may affect those wait times, for some of those big attractions that a lot of people like to utilize early entry for. So, that being said, your group is going to have to decide just how early you think you are able to be at the parks, because you've gotta realize if the park open is posted at 9 a.m., that means that early entry for resort guests will be 8:30, but starting at 7:45, you can get in line for rides. So that means that you're going to want to be in the park or at the gates, I should say, at least 30 minutes prior to that happening. So basically there's not a second holding pattern that happens for the rope drop for early entry guests anymore. So, keep in mind, Tomorrowland and Fantasyland are still the sections that are open for early entry guests. Frontierland and Adventureland do not open still until official park open, which would be your non-resort guest rope drop. So park open rope drop is still the Frontierland and Adventureland side. Another note that if you're thinking about early entry attractions, Tron, which is a big attraction at Magic Kingdom, does not open for early entry. So you've got a lot of decisions to make at Magic Kingdom when it comes to your early entry strategy. The other thing to note is there are no more virtual queues being utilized in Magic Kingdom. So previously, when we talked about this, there were virtual queues. Tron had one, Tiana's Bayou Adventure had one. Those have now gone away. So everything is standby or lightning lanes of varying kinds at Magic Kingdom. So, if you are using lightning lanes, let's talk about a very brief strategy for lightning lanes. Remember that lightning lanes at Disney World are now booked ahead of time. If you are a resort guest, 7 days ahead is of your check-in day is when you can book. If you are a non-resort guest, 3 days ahead of your first park day on your ticket is when you will be able to book. So, the biggest key, especially at Magic Kingdom for lightning lanes, is you are going to be able to utilize these lightning lanes probably the most at Magic Kingdom of all of the parks. So, you want to get your times that you pre book to be as early as possible. That being said, if you remember, there are tier setups for the rides for your lightning lanes at Magic Kingdom. My suggestion for what I have seen with lightning lanes at Magic Kingdom is for your tier 1 pre-booked ride, I would choose either Peter Pan or Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Those would be my two top choices for tier 1. For tier 2, my top choices would be Buzz Lightyear, Haunted Mansion, or Pirates. So you can book one tier 1 and two tier 2s for your multi-pass at Magic Kingdom. But those would be the ones that I would choose from. And that's going to depend greatly on who is traveling with you, what your interests are for your travel party, all those types of things. If you're looking at single pass options for lightning lanes, that would be Seven Dwarfs, Mine Train, and Tron. So even though Tron is not open during early entry, another option you do have is that single pass. Again, depending on your budget and the wants and needs of your group. So let's talk about if you are utilizing early entry, where should you go? So on property, early entry suggestions for where to head. If you've got small kiddos that are not thrill seekers, that just want to do all the dark rides and a lot of the stuff in Fantasyland. Again, Fantasyland is super popular, just like at Disneyland. At Magic Kingdom, same thing. Although most of the attractions for Fantasyland have lightning lanes at Magic Kingdom, which is different than Disneyland. But small children for early entry, I would suggest Peter Pan, Winnie the Pooh, and Buzz Lightyear as some good options for your early entry time. And that may depend also on what you're doing with the thrill seekers in your group. So you may want to pick something that's kind of close by for the non-thrill seekers to do while your thrill seekers do a big e-ticket attraction. Now, your thrill seekers, again, early entry, we're talking Tomorrowland and Fantasyland. You have kind of three options to start with. You can do Space Mountain. That is logistically probably your easiest option for rope drop for your thrill seekers for early entry. Now, you can, if Tron is a big deal for you, you can go and queue up for Tron, keeping in mind that you are going to be waiting 75 minutes for that queue to open. Do I think that's the best use of your early entry time? No. But do I understand that there are people that will choose to do that? Yes. Um, I would suggest figuring out your budget to get that single pass for Tron because that's going to be the easiest way for you to ride it without wasting an hour plus of your day at Magic Kingdom. The other option that you have would be to go to Seven Dwarfs. That is a very popular rope drop attraction for early entry, but it is definitely an option. Typically speaking, if you are not queued up early for Seven Dwarfs, you're still going to be waiting 45 minutes to an hour. So again, you just have to kind of decide about with Seven Dwarfs, do you want to budget accordingly to be able to get that single pass for Seven Dwarfs, or do you want to wait in line? Couple different options. Again, Tron, Space Mountain, Seven Dwarfs. Space Mountain would be what I personally would do, because I would likely budget for Seven Dwarfs and Tron. If I want to ride them, I would budget for that single pass for those. After that, I would highly suggest heading over again. Now, this is a little tricky because Big Thunder Mountain is currently closed at Magic Kingdom at the moment that we are recording this and is set to be closed for the rest of the year. But that being said, that would be my option for after the ones that I just talked about. So I would do something like Space Mountain, maybe hit one more ride on the way over, and then hit Big Thunder Mountain and go from there. Without Big Thunder Mountain being open, you really just have to decide what makes the most sense kind of geographically and logistically for your group based on what your first rope drop early entry ride is. And I hope that makes sense. I know it's a little complicated, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to early entry at Magic Kingdom if you're trying to get those big thrill rides in. Now, let's talk about if you are staying off property and you are utilizing rope drop at Magic Kingdom. So, rope drop at Magic Kingdom is at park open, and that is when you will have a standard rope drop over at the Frontierland and Adventureland side of the park. That is for any guest that does not have access to early entry. That is your official rope drop for the park open. If you have small children, you are off property and you are utilizing the official rope drop park open time, my suggestion to you would be Jungle Cruise first, then Pirates, and then while you're over there, I would do Aladdin's Magic Carpet so you don't have to backtrack and do that later. So I would kind of hit that little pocket of rides, and then go from there. If you have thrill seekers and you are utilizing that rope drop time for official park open, currently I would go to Tiana's Bayou Adventure. If you are listening to this podcast in the future and Big Thunder Mountain has opened again, I would hit Big Thunder Mountain first and then go to Tiana's because Tiana's does tend to sleep in the morning. So it's really tricky right now at Magic Kingdom, that rope drop, because you're better off doing something like Pirates, Haunted Mansion, taking a look and see. Sometimes the line at Space Mountain will have come back down from the early entry time and you could maybe hit over there. So that one's a little trickier because it really kind of depends on the day and it depends on when Big Thunder Mountain reopens and when Tiana's decides to wake up for the morning. So again, Magic Kingdom is a little tricky. You just have to have that ABC plan to make sure that you know where you're going to pivot to if you end up needing to pivot from your initial thoughts on rope drop. So that is Magic Kingdom, sort of the best way that I can describe it in a general sense. Let's talk about something much easier. Let's talk about Animal Kingdom. Um, as far as Animal Kingdom goes, the only things that have really changed recently are the fact that Triceratops Spin has closed and It's Tough to Be a Bug has closed. So they are down a few attractions over there right now, which makes it pretty easy to navigate and truly makes it a not a full day park, unfortunately. When the new stuff over there opens, it's going to be amazing. They're going to have a ton of new things for everyone to enjoy and experience. But as of right now, we're down 2 attractions over there at Animal Kingdom. I do still suggest arriving to the park 30 minutes before park open. Logistically, this one is really easy to deal with. You go through security, you go through the gate. They will hold resort guests will go to the left around the what is that? Oasis, I think is what they call it, but that front little section where you kind of have to choose left or right. Resort guests will go to the left. Non-resort guests will go to the right to be queued until park open and rope drop. But I would still arrive at least 30 minutes to give yourself time to get scanned in. You could need longer, more time if it's a super busy time of year. So keep that in mind. If you're using lightning lanes, there are no tiers at this park. So for your lightning lanes, my suggestion for the 3 that I would book ahead of time would be Navi River, the Safari, and then Expedition Everest. So those would be the 3 if you're planning to use lightning lanes that I would book ahead of time. Flight of Passage, which is your other Avatar ride over in Pandora, does have a single pass. I do suggest it if you're able to budget because I think it just makes logistics a lot easier at this park. I would say if you are able to purchase the single pass for Flight of Passage, chances are really good that you don't need multi-pass at this park, especially being down a few attractions. There's not a ton here that is hard to get to if you utilize early entry and if you're there at the park early. So let's talk about what pathway to take for Animal Kingdom. If you are utilizing early entry, you have kind of 2 options. If you have purchased your Flight of Passage single pass, you do not need to worry about rope dropping Flight of Passage. And then I would go to Navi River Journey and then the Safari. Now, the Safari typically opens about 15 minutes after official park open time. So if you get on Navi River fairly quickly, you may still have to wait 20-30 minutes for that the Safari line to open. So keep that in mind. Take a look at your timing, but I do think that's the best use of your time. If you do not plan to purchase that Flight of Passage single pass, you definitely are going to need to rope drop Flight of Passage. You may still wait an hour or so, but that is your best bet for riding that particular attraction. After you have visited Pandora, I would again go over to the Safari. If you are planning to rope drop Flight of Passage, I would not suggest also trying to do Navi River at the same time, unless you are in and out of Flight of Passage very, very fast. Because the Safari, once you get about 30-45 minutes into park open, your chances of seeing active animals on the safari starts to greatly decrease as the temperature increases. So I always suggest trying to get to the safari as early as you possibly can, just for that alone. Your experiences will be better, generally speaking, when you can get there early. So again, keep in mind that Safari typically doesn't open until about 15 minutes after park open. You can find that in your My Disney Experience app. The easiest way is to check the map feature, click on Animal Kingdom, and then click the Safari to see when you scroll down, it'll show you the hours for the day. So All of that being said, then after you hit the safari, I would continue your way clockwise around the park, and I would do Expedition Everest and then Dinosaur. If you're a water ride person, throw Cali River Rapids in there, but I would just kind of work your way clockwise, starting in Pandora all the way around until you have finished Dinosaur. Now, if you are off property and you are planning to utilize standard rope drop at Animal Kingdom, your best bet is going to be to head to the safari first. Like I said, it does typically open about 15 minutes after park open, but that means you're waiting 15 minutes and then you're walking straight on through that queue and getting on your safari truck to go take a look at the animals. Off-property guests, it's a little trickier to navigate, the Pandora section of the park because you really need to hit that safari first. So after you hit the safari, check the wait time for Navi River. If it's like 20, 25 or less, head over there and do that before going back over to Everest and then Dinosaur. But if not, you may just have to kind of keep an eye on the wait times for Navi River and see what it does throughout the day. For Flight of Passage, you may just have to kind of keep an eye on the wait times for Navi River and see what it does throughout the day. For Flight of Passage, if you are off property and you are not utilizing the single pass, your best bet is to get into that line like right at park close. Or again, just keep an eye on the wait times to see for that one. If you get anything under about an hour, it's a good time to go get in line, generally speaking, for that. So that is your Animal Kingdom plan for your early entry and rope drop at that park. Let's now talk about EPCOT. EPCOT, again, very similar to what we've heard previously. However, the big thing here is that there is no longer a virtual queue option for Cosmic Rewind. So that virtual queue went away the same time that the virtual queues over at Magic Kingdom went away. You no longer have the option. So that virtual queue went away the same time that the virtual queues over at Magic Kingdom went away. You no longer have the option to utilize that for Cosmic Rewind. So that will drastically change how you plan your early entry if you are a resort guest. All that being said, we'll get to that here in just a second. I would arrive to EPCOT at least 30 minutes before park open. Do keep in mind that something unique to EPCOT is there are two entry points to this park. The one is at the front by Spaceship Earth, the big golf ball, and the other one is at to the International Gateway, which is between the UK and France pavilions of World Showcase. So, two different entry points for your rope drop or early entry, depending on what you're utilizing. Both of those are accessible to both resort guests and non-resort guests. Although I will say your non-resort guests are typically going to come in the front. It's a lot harder to get to International Gateway if you are not staying on property. The only exception to that would be like the Swan and Dolphin, but those would be considered on property in this situation. So typically off property, you're going to end up at that front entrance by Spaceship Earth. Again, no more virtual queue for Cosmic Rewind can drastically change your approach to rope drop for this. But before we get there, let's talk about lightning lanes just briefly. There are two tiers for lightning lanes at this park as well. So for tier 1, you're really choosing between Frozen or Remy's Ratatouille Adventure. You're going to have to make a decision. I always suggest Remy. If you are a family that wants to do both, I always suggest booking Remy. It is a harder lightning lane to get. It sells out more quickly, and it is less likely to have extra times pop up throughout the day as you're refreshing to try to modify. So I always suggest Remy. If your group doesn't want to ride Remy, then definitely book a Frozen time for your tier 1. For tier 2, really any of those options are pretty equally matched for the rest of the rides that you have as options for tier 2. If it's me, I'm going to be choosing Figment, Nemo, and Spaceship Earth for my tier 2s, but really any of those are fine options for your tier 2s. Again, utilizing an early time as much as possible for one of those tier 2 attractions is going to help increase your chances of getting additional lightning lanes throughout the rest of your day at Epcot. Now, we talked about no more virtual queue for Cosmic Rewind. It does still have a single pass option. So if you're utilizing lightning lanes and you want to do a single pass option for Cosmic Rewind, I highly suggest you do. The single pass options are selling out very quickly. So you need to be ready for that on your 7-day out. If you are an off property guest that's using lightning lanes, Guardians of the Galaxy is likely to sell out before your 3-day window. Doesn't make it completely impossible to find a time. You will have to be on your phone refreshing and hopefully get lucky for times to pop up for that one kind of day of. But chances are really good for my non-resort guests trying to get a single pass for Guardians. Chances are very low, unfortunately, for that one. Now, let's talk about early entry. If you are someone utilizing early entry and you have small children, you are going to want to hit either Remy or Frozen first. And I would go to the opposite of whichever one you have a lightning lane for, right? So if you booked a Remy lightning lane, like I suggested, then you're going to rope drop Frozen. If you booked a Frozen lightning lane because you don't need to do Remy, well, then you're in good shape. But I would do either Remy or Frozen for your rope drop to start. And then from there, it really just depends, but I would head over to kind of the seas and the land area from there, and I would hit things like Nemo, the Moana walkthrough, Figment, that side of the park. But that's where you're going to want to spend a lot of your time with your littles. You can also hit Living with the Land while you're over there. There's lots of options and things for your little ones to do over on that side. Now, if you are utilizing early entry and you have thrill seekers, you can attempt to rope drop Cosmic Rewind. Uh, I know that it is right now the most popular rope drop ride, probably in any of the parks. Um, So you just really have to determine with Cosmic Rewind, am I buying a single pass? Am I going to try to rope drop it? Um, Times for that one are still varying greatly. Um, Typically at rope drop for that, it gets about a 2-hour wait. We have seen a trend of kind of a little bit after park open, it dips down closer to maybe 45 to an hour, but that's about as low as you're gonna find it. So some decisions are gonna have to be made based on your budget and your wants and needs of your travel party when it comes to Cosmic Rewind. If you are doing Cosmic Rewind over there, on that side of the park, and you want to do Mission Space, that's a great time to do Mission Space while you're over on that side of the park during early entry. Now, if you are off property, let's talk about rope drop and a pathway for you for rope drop. For small kiddos for rope drop, you may get lucky and still be able to hit Frozen at a lower weight. It's not a guarantee. It really just depends on the day, and what you are planning to do for the rest of your day. So if you've got small children, you may be able to hit Frozen. Remy is very unlikely that you're going to be able to do that at rope drop for off-property guests. It's going to have an hour or more wait at that point. So I would again suggest going over to that World Discovery section, hitting things like Nemo, Living with the Land, Figment, Moana, that whole section. Again, like I talked about for on property, really the same. A lot of those wait times in the morning are going to be fairly low and remain low. So you'll have a good opportunity to get through some of those with your littles. If you are a thrill seeker, again, this one's really hard and you're off property and you are not able to utilize early entry, Cosmic Rewind is going to be off the table for your rope drop ride because it typically has a very long line unless you get really lucky. And again, there's no way to know. It's really just going to depend on the day. That's why I talked about having a plan A, plan B, plan C. So I would suggest for thrill seekers heading to Soarin' first, and then you can cross over to do Mission Space. And then Test Track is another one to consider when it reopens, hopefully later this year. That's another one to consider for your thrill seekers, because that typically is not going to get as bad of a wait during your early entry or during early entry to then trickle into having a big wait during your rope drop time. So that's kind of the idea for Epcot. It's a little tricky right now with Cosmic Rewind and without having Test Track open. Uh, so we'll have to do an update on that one once we see what Test Track does to rope drop there. So that all being said, let's talk about Hollywood Studios, which is arguably the hardest rope drop park, I think, out of all of the ones that we've talked about. So lately, Hollywood Studios has been going back and forth for their rope drop early entry setup. Typically, it was always that they held you at the front gate, and then they had two separate areas, one for early entry guests to check in and one for off-property guests to check in. They have experimented with more of a system like what we were talking about with Magic Kingdom earlier, where they will let everybody in and then you can queue up for specific rides in specific areas and tap in to show that you are eligible for early entry. So right now, last I knew, they had gone back to holding you at the front gate, but it's gone back and forth a couple times. So it may be a surprise when you get to the front gate based on the crowds and what they're planning to do and what they think the what they're planning for crowd levels that day. Um, so just be ready for either option. Which is why I suggest arriving at least an hour before the park opens for Hollywood Studios. That also being said, if they are holding people at the front and it starts to get too crowded, they will open early entry earlier than what is being posted for resort guests. So I've seen it be 15 minutes earlier. I've seen it be a whole half hour earlier than what was posted. So you definitely want to be there early to make the most of that time. There are so many e-ticket and thrill rides here. Rope drop is really, really dependent on what your group wants to do and what rides they want to hit. Um, that being said, we talked a little bit about this with like Radiator Springs Racers at Disney California Adventure. I do not suggest rope dropping Rise of the Resistance at Hollywood Studios because it is very slow to wake up in the morning. And you all have heard me say that before. I will continue to say it. It doesn't like to wake up on time. It doesn't like to open on time. I do not suggest rope dropping it. Your best bet for Rise of the Resistance. Now, it does have a single pass, but your best bet is to check for when it goes down and try to catch it when it comes right back up so you can hop in line and have a shorter line, if I'm being completely honest with you. That may or may not work with your family vacation, so decisions will have to be made about that. But let's talk about if you are using lightning lanes. There are two tiers for lightning lanes at Hollywood Studios. Tier 1, I'm always going to suggest booking Slinky Dog for your tier 1. I know there are other fun attractions in tier 1. I always suggest Slinky Dog. It's the hardest one to get. It sells out the fastest. It is the least likely to have additional times pop up throughout the day. Book Slinky Dog for your tier 1. For tier 2, there are a couple different options. Some are shows. I don't suggest doing shows for your tier 2 for pre-booking. You might utilize those shows later in the day after you've done the rides. That's perfectly fine. But I do not suggest doing the shows for your pre-booking for lightning rides. That's perfectly fine. But I do not suggest doing the shows for your pre-booking for lightning lanes. I suggest Toy Story Mania and Tower of Terror as your options for that. So those would be your tier 2 ones that I personally would suggest. Now, that being said, you're going to have to look at your group. You're going to have to look at what rides everybody wants to do to make it make sense for your travel party for that. Again, Rise of the Resistance has that single pass option if your budget allows for that. I do suggest it because that ride is so finicky. You never know when it's going to be up, when it's going to be down. So having a single pass for that is really the easiest way to get on that ride, if you are able to budget accordingly for that. Rope drop here for early entry really highly depends on what your group wants to do and whether or not you're using lightning lanes. So I'm going to have a couple more categories for this one, because of that, because it really just depends on your situation going into the park. So if you are on property and you are using lightning lanes, which is what I suggested earlier, to do Slinky Dog, Toy Story Mania, and Tower of Terror as your 3 lightning lanes. So if you are on property using lightning lanes and you have small children, during early entry, I suggest going to Runaway Railway, Alien Swirling Saucers, and Toy Story Mania. Those are going to be your 3 best options for small kiddos. I would suggest the problem is with those 3 during early entry, Toy Story Mania tends to get a longer line because people pivot away from Slinky Dog and go there. So I would almost go there first and then maybe come back to Runaway Railway and then go to Alien Swirling Saucers. It's a little bit of backtracking, but Toy Story Land and the Chinese Theater for Runaway Railways are not too far away. Hollywood Studios is just terrible for pathways and navigating anyway, so you're gonna end up backtracking, but my suggestion would be maybe to do them in those orders. Toy Story Mania first so you can skip some of those, pivoting crowds and then come back to do Runaway Railway and then Alien Swirling Saucers after that. Now, if you are on property using lightning lanes and you have thrill seekers, remember we booked Slinky Dog, Tower of Terror, and Toy Story Mania. um, you can do Rock and Roller Coaster as a rope drop option for early entry. You might as well do Tower of Terror while you're down there and get a second ride on that. And then after that, I would head probably back to the Star Wars area and do something like Smuggler's Run, um, to kind of round out your early entry time. The thing about Hollywood Studios that's so tricky is there's not as many rides. There's a lot of characters and a lot of shows, and not a ton of rides for littles. A lot of them have a height requirement. A lot of them are more thrill rides. So you just really have to keep that in mind. Now, if you are on property and you are not doing lightning lanes, I would do the same thing that I talked about earlier for small children. I would hit Toy Story Mania, Runaway Railway, Alien Swirling Saucers for your littles. If you are a thrill seeker and you are not using lightning lanes and you are staying on property, you're going to have to rope drop Slinky Dog and you're going to have to beeline it there and get it there very promptly when the early entry time starts. After that, unfortunately, I would suggest kind of backtracking all the way back towards the front of the park to go down, and hit Rock and Roller Coaster and Tower of Terror after that. So those would be my thrill seeker options. After you hit Tower and Rockin', then you can head over to Star Wars and kind of knock some of those rides out as well. Chances are good that if you've got thrill seekers, they can utilize some single rider lines for things like Smuggler's Run or Rise of the Resistance if they've done it before, which I hadn't mentioned earlier. If you're someone who has done Rise of the Resistance before, they do have a really great single rider option. I do not suggest single rider for your first time because you will miss out on some of the storytelling elements in the pre-shows, but I do suggest that for people who have been on it before. Now, if you are off property and you are, either using lightning lanes or not using lightning lanes, same suggestion for your small kiddos. Toy Story Mania, Runaway Railway, Alien Swirling Saucers. For thrill seekers that are off property, I would suggest doing Rock and Roller Coaster and Tower of Terror first because those are still, even during early entry, those still don't tend to get the crazy wait times. You're still going to be able to find those probably at like a 20, maybe 30-minute wait, which is not terrible. And then after that, head over to do something like Smuggler's Run and check on the status of Rise of the Resistance for the day. So, lots of different options at Hollywood Studios. It's really hard It's a really hard park to navigate because it really depends on your travel party, what attractions you want to do. Are you using lightning lanes? Are you getting the single pass for Rise of the Resistance? There's so many variables that come into it that makes that park really, really, really hard to navigate, unfortunately. So, all of that being said, that is kind of your fast and furious updated guide to early entry and rope drop. I hope that all of that can be helpful to you if you are planning an upcoming trip to either Disneyland or Disney World. Hopefully, we touched on a couple things that can help guide you as you are making your plans. I do highly suggest at least planning out your morning for these parks, planning out the list of attractions that are your priority and working in what we talked about during this episode to help you kind of figure out what order to do things in and what lands to go to first and kind of what will be left over after your early entry time that will hopefully help formulate those itineraries for you. If you ever need help with a park itinerary for your group, please send us an email or reach out to us on social media. I love helping people do that. It's so fun for me to problem solve and figure out what the best course of action for you or your group may be. You can always reach out via email to momstreetusa@gmail.com. You can find us on tons of social media. We are on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Mom Street USA. And as always, you can reach out on our good friend Kirk at Walrus Carp, his Discord server. We do have a Mom Street channel on there that you are always welcome to ask questions or give input on there as well. We love to hear from you, especially with some of this lightning lane stuff, like I mentioned. Here in the next month or so, I am going to be doing another lightning lane overview Q&A kind of setup. So if you've got questions about lightning lanes or something that I said about lightning lanes in this episode or it doesn't make sense, please send me a message so that way I can make sure in that episode I cover it more in depthly and go over it. Lightning lanes are so tricky and they're so dependent on your travel party that it's really hard to kind of give a general overview, but I do the best I can to make it make sense. And in that episode coming up, we will go through kind of step by step what you need to do for lightning lanes when it comes to primarily Disney World, because Disneyland has been the same system for the last several years. Disney World is the one that keeps us on our toes and keeps changing. So that is coming up in the future. Now, next episode that we have for Mom Street USA, you're stuck with me again. Like I mentioned, our hub friends are currently all traveling and busy with work trips and vacation trips. So, I am holding down the Mom Street USA fort again for another episode next. The next episode, we're going to be talking about something totally random and fun, but I'm excited. We're going to be talking about speaking the Disney park language. So, talking about abbreviations and different terminology, kind of like we talked about early entry and rope drop today. We'll include those in our next episode, I'm sure, but we'll be talking all about speaking the Disney parks language and what terms do you need to know when you are planning and when you go to the parks. So if you've got input on that, I would love to hear it on our Discord channel. If you've got some fun things to include in there, please post that there so that way I can be on the lookout for it and I can include it in our next episode. Thank you guys all so much for your support and for listening, and I will catch you guys on the next episode of Mom Street USA. Bye, everyone.